right, good morning. We are live now. Ken Sharpe, welcome to Live Chat with Josie. Good morning. And where are you speaking to us from this morning?
Good morning to you, Josie. Thank you for having me on your talk. I'm coming to you from Seychelles, from the island of Seychelles. I live on an island called Eden Island. It's almost like the Garden of Eden, Aja.
Oh, interesting. How's the weather there and what's happening there with COVID-19?
The weather's great. We have a tropical climate, so never more than 32 degrees and never less than 28. So always hot and warm. Tropical sometimes have winds, seasonal winds, and a bit of rain coming in on the monsoons, but nothing too hectic. COVID-19 has not really touched the island. When it started out in March, we had 10 cases. They were isolated at the airport and taken off to quarantine. And since then, there's been no more COVID. So we are marketed as a COVID-free island.
Great. So it is a culture here on Live Chat with Josie that every guest introduces themselves. Who exactly is Ken Sharpe?
Thank you, Josie. Well, I'm a Zimbabwean born in Harare in 1973. At a time when there was much change in Zimbabwe. That time was Southern Rhodesia, so it was still during the Civil War. I grew up in Harare in my younger years, spent a few years in South Africa, and then moved back to Zimbabwe when I was a teenager, and went to school in Marindera at Peterhouse until I was in Form 4, then left to the UK to finish my studies, and in 1990 came back. I was living with my great aunt in the UK. And she passed away, so I came back bereaving her death to Zimbabwe to be with family, and never went back to the UK. Never finished my schooling, never finished high school, never went to university, and went into business at 18 as a young entrepreneur. In 1990, end of 1990, 91, I established an import company called Westridge Trading, and we were importing FMCG goods into Zimbabwe.
What are
Prior to
FMCG?
that, FMCG is fast-moving consumer goods, so basically grocery lines,
Okay.
confectionery and grocery products from outside the country. If you recall that time in Zimbabwe, probably you were too young, Josie, but in the early 90s, there were no products in the supermarkets. It was kind of, quite closed and mainly local brands. There were no foreign imported brands. And I started a relationship with a man called Jimmy Pavlo, who owns Lucullus in Fife Avenue. And all the goodies that he used to have in his shop, I used to help import them and bring them in. And through that, establish some agencies in different food lines.
I remember Lucullus very well. Oh, I didn't know that you were supplying.
That's where it all started.
Interesting. So how was it then growing up in Zimbabwe? I want to know how it was. I'm only like a born free. So how was it like growing up in Zimbabwe back then, when your dad had a mine, right? A farm, a
Yes,
mine.
yes,
Yeah.
that's right. My family history is an interesting one as well. And I'll tell you a little family secret. We always had this kind of story, a legend that was passed down through the generations that we come from the Vikings. So what is fact is that my great-great-grandfather was the rear admiral of the British fleet. So we were born in Britain. Our ancestors, most of them came from England. And my great-grandfather immigrated to Africa, to South Africa, as an explorer. I guess through the Viking genes, we've had this spirit of adventure and looking out for the opportunities. So he came out to Africa as an explorer, looking for mining opportunities. Ended up in Natal as a farmer on a sugarcane farm. Didn't like farming very much, and then started going through South Africa up to through that time at southern and northern Rhodesia, and then into Naika, Tanzania. As he was exploring, which took many years to travel in those days, his son, my grandfather, decided he would study geology and come join his father. So my grandfather, Dr. Ken Sharpe, studied geology and was very keen to get back to Africa to help his father. And he came out to Africa with his 3 young children at the time. My father was 2 years old. They came out on the boat, landed in Natal, and then made their way up through southern Africa into Tanzania. And he actually saw his father a few months before he passed. He then decided to live in South Africa and join a mining company, Rio Tinto. He became their chief geologist and CEO, and basically was headhunted by Lonro, and then met a man called Tiny Rowland, who quite famous, and for Tiny, he bought up most of Tiny's mining assets and created Lonro. So through that, my father had an interest in mining from a young age, and he never wanted to go the professional route. My grandfather was an English gentleman, and he worked as a professional. But my father had that spirit of adventure, I guess, and wanted to explore out on his own, had an entrepreneurial ambition, and started his own mines. He worked in the copper belt, where my two elder siblings were born in Zambia, northern Zambia at the time, Kitwe and Luanshya. And he worked his way up to mine captain. He started at the bottom of the ranks and worked his way up, and then immigrated to Zimbabwe, which was southern Rhodesia at the time, Salisbury, where I was born with my younger brother. And we grew up in Salisbury. I was born in the hospital, but actually when we were living at that time, we were staying in an area near Mazoe. My father had a mine there, and Christian Bank, actually. And in that place, he didn't have a home. We actually lived in a hut, with a grass roof and mud walls. Yes. So I was born into humble circumstances, like many Africans. It's unusual for a Mukiwa to be born into those kind of things, but we all have different ways to make it up to the top. And I guess today's story is a little bit about that, of adversity, of coming out of nothing, and
something.
yeah, I think all of us have that potential, regardless of where we come from. So, for the first few months of me growing up, being a child, I was in that environment on the mine. My mum often tells me, I don't remember that, but she tells me she had to learn how to cook on a wood fire in the hut. And eventually my dad built a house for us, so we moved into the house. And I grew up, as a young toddler, I guess, on that mine with many happy memories. My younger brother came 2.5 years later. And we always had a love-feud relationship growing up together, and many memories of beautiful times in the outdoors, especially in the outdoors, because my father continued mining, eventually moved to Shamva and had some mines there. And we spent a lot of time together on the mines.
All right, we're going to talk about who you are now. I mean, there is a lot of things that you have done. I am proud of you. I look up to you as a mentor. I mean, from nothing to who you are today. But how was your relationship like with your dad growing up?
I would say for the first 15 years, I idolized him. He was my idol. I looked up to him as a hero. He was my everything, my father. I really worshipped him, and I would do anything for him. There was nothing that I couldn't do for him. I was, I guess, a very humble kid and quite introverted. So, and obedient. I would follow, whatever he wanted, to the point where I was blinded. I had a blind side towards him, and he left my mother when I was a young teenager. And this is something maybe I'll explore a little bit about, is the generational curse that I would call it in our family. My family comes from a long history of philanderers, and I guess the Viking blood, the pagan. We all have some pagan backgrounds, and I guess that remained in the family. And it was a sad thing that my great grandfather left his wife. He actually married into aristocrats. He met a woman whose name was Hilda Swan. Her father was the inventor of the electric incandescent light bulb 3 months before Thomas Edison. I hope some Americans will listen to this, because they think an American invented the light bulb, but it was actually a British
We'll definitely make sure that they listen to it. They will have to watch
it. They need to correct the history, because Thomas Edison kind of stole the idea from my ancestor. And Sir Joseph, he got a knighthood from the Queen, Sir Joseph Wilson Swan. He invented the light bulb first, and he actually sued Edison. I guess it's in the family blood as well to sue. We've been in court quite a lot in my life, as well as my ancestors. So he sued Edison, and he won the he won the court battle, and the court gave him a 50% patent over the original patent that Edison had registered. And his daughter Hilda had met my great grandfather skiing in Switzerland. He was a captain in the British Navy, and he eloped with her and ran away to Africa. And when her child was born, my grandfather and my great aunt, who I lived with in the UK, her brother came to visit her, and he's my namesake. My middle name is Raiden, so Kenneth Raiden Swan came to visit his sister. And those days, of course, they had to travel by ships. So it took quite a few months to get there. And by the time he got to their house, he wrote back to his father saying, your daughter's living in these conditions, kind of similar to what I was born in. They were staying in a mud hut as well. And his father wrote back and said, that's not the conditions for a young lady to be living in. Immediately bring her back to England with her 2 young children. So she traveled back to England with my grandfather, who was 2 at the time. And that's why he never saw his father again. The wife and children went back to England. So kind of, if you think of that, I would say curse, where he no longer saw his wife and children. That happened again with my grandfather. He was working in Rio Tinto and had a secretary. Her name was Shirley. He had an affair with her and then divorced my grandmother, Thora, which was my father's mother. And again, the family was broken. So my father grew up with that. And then, of course, in my generation, we grew up with the same thing of our father divorcing our mother and leaving her for his business partner. So we've had that reality that we've had to live with and accept. So I guess from my late teens, I started to see, who he really was and what he represented. And I didn't want to associate myself with the same values. So I made a conscientious decision, I guess at about 15 years old, that I would change, that I would not be the same as him. And there and then I decided that the most important thing to me was a family, to have a family that was stable, to have one wife and stick with her through thick and thin. Yeah. I'm glad to say I've been married now, I think 27 years. So
27?
Yeah, this year, yeah, 27 years.
Okay, and I was reading your bio. You said that there was a time that your dad didn't support you in marrying your wife. What happened? What was the story?
Oh, it's a bit of a long story. So he was on this mine in Shamva, and he met the Russian mayor at the time. Lushkov came to Zimbabwe and wanted to buy his mines. So he had signed an agreement to sell his mines to these Russians for quite a lot of money. And one of the conditions was that he had to stop operations. And when you employ a couple hundred people, the payroll is big. And he did that, and they didn't come up with the money. They made him wait in limbo for like 6 months. And it almost caused him, bankruptcy and closure. So he didn't like Russians very much. And then, of course, a few months later, I came on the scene with my bride-to-be and said, this is the woman of my dreams. I want to marry her. I need your permission as my father. I still respect you and love you. I need your blessing, And he was very reluctant to give it to me. So he was quite a funny man. He had a lot of humor in him. I remember him saying, okay, well, let me meet this girl. And we came together to meet him at his house in Marlborough. And I remember him saying to her, do you know that you're going to have black children? And she said, what? He said, yes. Didn't Kenneth tell you that we have a relative of ours was a black man? So we have black genetics, and there could be a throwback, and you must accept if you marry him, you may have a black child. Well, it was a joke, of course, but little did he know that I would end up adopting a black son. So he was a funny guy. He had a funny sense of humor, but he was a very hardworking man, a very hardened man, very strong values and principles. It was a difficult relationship. At one stage, we had a big argument, and I stopped talking to him for probably about 6 or 7 years. And then he got older, and I got softer and decided it was best to reconcile. So I got to see him, and I'd say the last 5 years of his life, I was the closest person that he had to him. I supported him financially and morally, and was there right up until his passing.
Okay, but when you adopted your son, was he still alive, the black son?
Yes, he was alive for about 2 years before he passed. So 2 years prior.
And what did he say? What did he say about that?
He was okay with it. I think in his latter years, he really had softened a lot. He was a very aggressive man, younger. And I think as he got older and weaker, he became softer.
And Ken, tell me, how was it growing up as a Mukiwa in Zimbabwe? I mean, as a man of color?
Mixed feelings. I think we had that sense of entitlement. I don't want to deny it. The white community was definitely entitled in many ways. But on the other hand, I was a free spirit, and I always had black friends. In fact, at Peterhouse, one of my best friends was a guy called Masimba Rushwaya, and Simba and me were
Okay.
good mates. We used to hike out together and do stuff together. And I remember having a fight. I think it was in form 3, a really bad fight. Someone had, excuse me to use the language, but called me a kafa lover, a young white boy named Richard, and I ended up beating him up over this, and I got suspended from school. I got 6 lashes. I got beaten 6 times and was suspended. But I think my heart was genuinely always more of a liberal. I never had any kind of racial connotations. I didn't see people by their color. I saw them by their heart. And I can only say really it's from God, because I had no background or upbringing to teach me that way. It was just what I felt was right.
Okay, so if you're also a Christian, I know that I follow you and I see you sharing a lot of verses, and it's quite inspirational. But did you grow up in a Christian background, or it's something that came up later, maybe when you met your wife?
Yeah, it's again an interesting story. I think, like most of us, we're born into families that have some kind of belief system. So my family was Anglican by tradition. I was baptized by my aunt, my father's sister, who's a devout Catholic, as a young child, at 6 months old, and I can't remember that, and I don't have any real memories of church other than being the odd attendance at Christmas time. Going to a Christian school, we studied divinity as a subject, but I had no personal relationship with God or with Jesus Christ. And it was probably only after my accident, my skiing accident, that I had the sudden realization that there was more to life than just the physical body. Prior to that, I think, and that accident was in 2007. So prior to that, and that's when I was 33 years old. I was just about to turn 33 years old. So prior to that, I'd grown up and become a self-made man with my hands in my head, and was very confident in myself and my own abilities, and really thought that if there was a God, perhaps he wasn't relevant for the time that I was in. And
Mm.
maybe a long time ago he was there, and I didn't have any dispute of that, but I also didn't have any acknowledgement of him in my life. And then I had the skiing accident in Canada in 2007, a near-death experience where my brain was severed from my skull, from my ear to my jaw in length, that wide across the skull.
My
The band
God.
of dura membrane, yeah, the dura membrane that holds the brain to the skull was ripped off on impact. I hit a tree skiing without a helmet, kind of like if you know Bono's story, or the racing car driver,
Mhm.
Shoemaker. You may have heard he's in a coma still. So that hematoma grew in my brain to about 60% of my brain cavity, filled up with blood over a few hours. And I was taken to hospital. I was unconscious by the time I got there. I actually remember dying in the ambulance. I remember lying there, immobilized, looking at the ceiling of the roof of the ambulance and just thinking, this is it. Life's going to end. I'm dying. I couldn't taste anything. I couldn't smell anything. I couldn't hear anything. I could barely see anything. So all my senses had slowly evaporated from me until I was lying there like a kind of mummy vegetable, just thinking, that's it, I'm dying. And the people moving around me were dark shadows. I was panicked because I was in North America, didn't have my ID on me or my credit card or insurance. I was on my own. My wife was in a different ski group. And I was just thinking to myself, that's it, I'm going to die here, and they're not going to treat me even if I get to hospital. And in those last moments, I just remember saying to myself, if there's a God, just allow me to see, just allow me to keep my eyesight. It was the most valuable thing that I had left. That eyesight was just holding on to it desperately and saying, if I can just wake up from this and have nothing but my eyesight, it will be okay. If I'm a paraplegic in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, it would be okay. And then, of course, woke up 5 days later from this coma, and they'd kept me in a comatose state. My brain had completely shut down. They did a craniotomy, which is to cut through the skull. They took a
Mhm.
flap of bone bigger than my hand off the skull because the blood clot was so big they had to remove it surgically. There was no ways of draining it. And 7 hours of brain surgery. They put back the skull. put 56 metal staples that are still in my skull, titanium metal clips to hold the skull together. There's actually no bone marrow in your skull bones, so when you break your skull, it cannot fuse back together, unlike most of your other bones in your body. And that trauma, my brain had compressed 3 times its size. So they said to my wife and daughter at the time, she was 11, my daughter, she's now 24. And they said to them that I would have almost like a 3% chance of survival, so almost zero. But if I woke up, I would definitely be a vegetable and have no memory, no faculties. I wouldn't be able to walk or talk or do anything, be a vegetable. So they were waiting for me to come out of the coma, and when the brain had expanded back to 99% of its size physiologically, they said they could try and wake me up, and they woke me up from the coma. And instantly on opening my eyes, I had everything restored like nothing had happened. It was almost like a button of pause was pressed 5 days earlier and play 5 days later. And the nurse, of course, asked me who I was and where I was and what day it was. And I realized then that I was, hadn't been around for the last 5 days, which was quite a shock. I actually thought it was a bad dream. I thought I was having a nightmare. And the ventilator had to take out of my mouth the life support machine that was keeping me alive. And I remember waking up from that and definitely thinking that was a nightmare, passing out again, and then the nurse woke me up. And the first thing I said is, "Where's my wife?" which was the last words that I'd said before I lost consciousness.
You passed out, yeah.
Desperately trying to find this woman, And the miracle is that within a few hours, I was wanting to leave the hospital. They kept me there for a few days to do tests. So I had to do physical tests, memory tests. And they wanted to keep me in rehab like physio for a couple of weeks. But I refused, very A-type personality and headstrong, and said, no, I'm leaving. I'm not going to stick around in this place. I was in an ICU where people were dying all the time. And I checked out of the hospital against doctor's order, went to the Western Bayshore Hotel and stayed in a suite there for a couple of days recovering. And just swim. I remember swimming in the pool in the mornings and then getting up and walking through the park, I think on the 2nd or 3rd day of my recovery. And I'd asked a lot of medical staff, why am I alive? What is this? What has happened to me? What have you done? How is it possible? No one could give me any kind of answers. Yeah. There was no intellectual answers. And I was exploring in my own mind, on this occasion, why am I alive? What have I done to deserve this? I'm not really a saint. What is it that I deserve to have a second chance? And at that moment, I just felt this presence of a being that wasn't mine come into my kind of chest, into my bosom, into my stomach, and tell me in a feeling, not so much in words, but in a feeling that I was his son and he loved me and he'd given me back his life for a purpose. And I just fell on my knees.
So this was your turnaround moment.
That's it. This is the epiphany that converted. Yes, it's an epiphany that converted my heart to God. And I knew that he was my father, and I knew that he loved me and he had a purpose for me, and he had given me back my life. So I felt very humbled and willing to do anything for him. At that moment, I was converted 100% to God himself, to God the Father. And I knew I had a father who was in control of everything, even the very breath that we have. And he'd given me back my life. He'd restored me. And I gave myself in exact obedience to him. At that moment, I just said, whatever you want me to do, wherever you want me to go, I will obey in exactness.
It's unfortunate that your wife... It's unfortunate that your wife is not a part of this conversation, but I would really want to know, when you were lying there, like the 5 days, obviously I think you asked her, what was going through her mind?
Yeah, she often says that I was in heaven with the angels and she was in hell with the devil, because she was tormented. She really was.
I know.
She was so frustrated, emotionally distraught. She could hardly speak. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. And she, interestingly enough, she came from an atheist background. She came out of the Soviet Union, and perhaps we'll talk a little bit about my love story and how we met. And it's really from Russia with love, that story. So, going back to her upbringing, they were taught atheism at school, and the communist government did not allow any religion. All churches were destroyed and banned. So when she had this experience, she was not a believer either. But one of the friends that came to the hospital, his father was a pastor, and he said, look, I know someone who can help Ken. And she said, well, I'll give him all my jewelry, all my money, no problem. And he
Oh.
said, no, he doesn't need that. He just needs you to pray. And she said, well, that guy doesn't listen to me. He said, why? And she said, well, my mom was sick about 6 months ago. She had a stroke. And I asked God to help save her, and he didn't. She died. So he said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we pray together? And instead of asking God to save Ken, we'll ask God to give you the strength to accept his will for Ken. And so they did pray, and she went every day to the chapel in the hospital. And she tells me that she would take the Bible. She didn't know what it was, and she would say to God, this book of yours, if you bring back my husband, I promise you I'll read it. Even if you bring him back on a wheelchair, I'll look after him. I don't mind if he's a vegetable. Just bring him back to me. So I think it was really her faith, her faith that and her prayers that were answered. Also, my daughter was very confident. At the time she was 11, she says that, the first thing they did was got some psychologists to come and speak to her. And she remembers them saying something like, your father is not going to live. He's a vegetable. He's likely to die. You need to accept this. And she was like, no, she wouldn't speak to them in English. She told her mom in Russian, I don't want to speak to these people. They're crazy. They don't know my father. He's going to wake up on my birthday. And her
My
birthday
father
was
is a
5 days
fighter.
later. Yeah, so she had the faith that her dad would wake up on her birthday 5 days later, which is what happened actually. So I think she also had a feeling, she knew in her heart that I was going to be okay.
That is a very deep story, Ken. But after the accident, have you gone back skiing again?
It was, I'm someone who likes to conquer my fears. So the year after the accident, I went back to the ski slopes. I actually went to find the tree with the mission of saying thank you to the tree, because I believe the knock on my head's helped me to be a better person. And of course, I couldn't find the exact tree, but I ski again, and we try and go every year skiing. I was in Austria this year just before the corona hit the borders of Italy.
So I can't believe you still do that.
Yeah, no, I don't have any fear.
Okay.
I only
All
fear
right.
God.
So then, then let's talk about the serial entrepreneur, Ken Sharpe. You have owned 50 companies, 20 partnerships. How did you do that? How is that possible?
Sheer perseverance, gut, instinct, resilience, perseverance. These are things that are very close to my heart. As a young man, I kind of had this entrepreneurial spirit, I guess, as well, which is a gift. I remember on my father's mine, in my young teens, maybe I was 13 or 14, I'd opened my first store, like a tuck shop, almost like a maduka, if you know what that is,
I do.
in the back, in the back of
Back
our
of
house,
the house.
at the end of the yeah. So I had a kind of maduka where the people from the local villages and that worked for my father would come and buy, and I'd grow vegetables. It was in this at the back of our house. We had this vegetable. I would say more than a garden. It was probably about 2 or 3 acres of land that we grew vegetables in. And at the bottom of that fence, I'd cut a hole and built this little hut kind of thing, and I would sell the vegetables through the hut and a few groceries. So I kind of got my teeth cut on early trading. And growing up, I always, even in England, when I went to stay on my own, I always wanted to earn money. It was like an ambition to have money. I enjoyed having money. And I knew that money was maybe not the answer to everything, but it was one of the tools that you needed to get ahead. So I remember I was studying in UK and working nights. I was selling timeshare. It was those days of timeshare in the UK in the early 90s. And because of my accent, I was quite popular. I had quite a high success rate of getting people interested to hear about it. Although they distrusted completely timeshare, they were interested in this guy's accent, and got to speak to them, developed a relationship, and made some commissions through that. And that's kind of what got me started. And then when my great aunt passed away, I'd saved up quite a bit of money. I bought some things that I had a friend who worked in Air Zimbabwe, and he said they needed some spares for the aircrafts. At those days, it was still OGIL, Open General Import License, it was called. So there was restrictions on imports. You couldn't bring anything into the country. And he managed to get this import license for some critical parts for the Boeing that I bought in the UK and brought back. And I think my markup was like 500%. And they didn't blink an eye. They
Wow.
just paid. And yeah, so I made quite a bit of money there. And then I started importing vehicles. I would go to Samcor, which is a manufacturer in South Africa in sort of 91, 92. And I remember having just enough money to buy one Mazda 626. And in those days, there were no imported vehicles in Zimbabwe. So again, through OGL contacts, we'd get the permit, bring in the car, and I would double my money on this car, So it was quick money. It was easy to make. And in those days, 20,000 US dollars is a lot more than 20,000 US dollars now. And I built up the capital, and eventually I was bringing in like 5 to 10 cars at a time and selling them. And through that, and the whole motivation you have for that was looking after this young bride. So I'll come to that story now. So I met my wife in Zimbabwe. She was passing through Zimbabwe. That time I came back in 1990 after my great aunt passed away. She was passing through for a couple of weeks. She was on her way to South Africa, and the Soviet Union had encouraged a few countries to boycott, and one of them was South Africa because of apartheid. So the Soviet Union had no embassy in South Africa. Their closest embassy was in Zimbabwe. So she had to land in Zimbabwe and get a visa to go to South Africa. And I met her at this function and saw her and told my friend, my best friend at the time, Mark, I said, look, that woman over there is going to be my wife. And he said, no ways, you got
just
no
like
chance.
That.
She doesn't speak any English, and she's way above your level. You've got no chance. Forget about it. So that was it. I dropped everything, sold everything I had, followed her to South Africa. And then when she left South Africa, back to the Soviet Union, I followed her to the Soviet Union. I landed in Moscow with a shirt like I'm wearing now. I had no idea where I was going, how cold it would be. It was the middle of winter. It was like minus 20 outside. And discovered that she wasn't anywhere near Moscow. She was actually in the Ukraine. I had to get a ticket then to Kiev. By that time, I'd run out of money. Managed to get to the airport and not be able to get into the city of Kiev because I had no more money. So I was stranded at the airport, which is about 20 kilometers out of the city center, in a small little town. And Soviet Russia, it was a dangerous place in those days. And a young, kind woman came up to me and said, look, I think you're going to get in trouble here. My brother's a taxi driver. He'll bring you back to my place. I told the story about this woman that I was in love with and wanted to find. She was fascinated. So took me home, gave me a phone. I phoned my wife. In those days, it was dial. You had to dial the numbers. And got her on the landline. And told her I was there. She couldn't believe it. She hardly spoke any English. I hardly spoke any Russian. So this lady would translate for us. And she figured out this guy is really crazy enough to come here. He's actually arrived. And she put me on a train the next day, and the rest is history. I met her family and persuaded her to come back and start a life. So we started a life together in 91. And part of my motivation of making money was looking after this young bride-to-be. We lived together for 2 years and then got married in 93. Our daughter was born in 96. So because of that relationship, through and connection through to Ukraine, I started doing business there in the 90s as well, which is where I made a lot of my money trading. There was great opportunities for trade. You could sell a truck of coffee, a 200,000 US dollar truck of coffee in an hour for cash. You didn't even have to offload the truck. People would come up to the truck and buy the cases out of the truck and pay you cash. So there was a lot of trading in the early days of the Soviet Union's collapse, when the borders opened up in the 90s. And that's where I made probably most of my money in those days. Zimbabwe, I kept going. We kept importing products into Zimbabwe and started a beverage factory. My partners and friends in Ukraine had a beverage factory. They were one of the first to bring out PET bottles, the plastic bottle that you blow mold from a preform. So we had a preform business and blow molding business and manufactured soft drinks. We did the same in Zimbabwe, and we manufactured beverages under a brand called African Twist. So over the years, I've built up a group of companies in Zimbabwe until the time of my accident. And then after that, I just decided that I would focus into real estate. So consciously, from about 2008, we really, instead of diversifying and continuing to build a conglomerate, we simplified and started to really strategically pick assets in real estate, both in Zimbabwe and outside.
Okay. And then is that when you started Pokogoro, or it's before? The Pokogoro is later on?
Yes. So what happened with Pokogoro was about 2008, we signed an agreement with the city of Harare, a joint venture agreement called Sunshine Developments. And we had met the city of Harare because me and my Ukrainian partner were looking at buying land in Zimbabwe and around Southern Africa. So he had told me that, the best place to buy land is from the government. So we went to see the city council, the junior kind of officers, and they were saying, well, we can't sell the land because we're in hyperinflation, and by the time we signed the contract and the ink's dried, we've lost half our money, or even 10 times our money. By the time the transfer goes through, we're getting cents in the dollar. As you could imagine, in those days, you sign a contract for $1 million. A week later, the exchange rate's gone up, 100% or
Yeah.
1,000%. In those days, it could have been 10,000%. The $1 million becomes $1,000. So they realized that they wouldn't want to sell land, but they said, look, if you're willing, we can partner. We can do a joint venture, a private-public partnership, a triple P, and we'll put in the land, you put in the money, we'll develop it together. So we thought that was a good idea. We did a 70-30 agreement, 70% us, 30 them, signed it with the city of Harare. At the time, there was an executive mayor, Mike Mahachi. I don't know if he's a relation to you.
Yes, he is.
He's a relation. So Mike, the engineer,
Yes.
we had never met him. We had never met Mike. I'll never forget. He was very professional, because he would sit in his office, and we would be in the boardroom with the town clerk, also another Mahachi, and they would negotiate the deal between the two rooms. We weren't allowed to leave the boardroom. So, the one Mahachi would go off to show the contract to the other one, then make changes, come back to our room. And until we got to a position that everyone was happy with, he wouldn't come into the room. And then when we finalized the agreement, he came into the room. We met him. My partner, Alexander Sheremet from Ukraine, was there. And we signed this agreement. It was initially an MOU. And then that MOU became an MOA. And then we established the joint venture in which they put in the land. Today, we have a project that's built out of that relationship called Mbudzi Market in the southern part of Harare. It's quite a successful, thriving market of retailers, small little shops under roof. So it's almost like a shopping mall for informal traders in the informal sector, and it's done really well. We have over 100,000 people going through the doors a week, and almost 300 shops trading there in the southern part next to Boca tobacco floors, just on the roundabout. And that was the first project we built with the city of Harare. So through that joint venture relationship, we established Sunshine Developments. And then through the relationship with the city, they introduced us to the parent ministry, which was Ministry of Local Government. And then through that, we were invited to build the airport highway, which there was a lot of controversy about. And the reason is because of the barter arrangement. At the time, we didn't want to get paid in any local currency. It was hyperinflation. And it was before dollarization. So we said, look, we'll accept land as payment. And basically, the government didn't have enough land to finance that road. It was an $80 million road. And after a few years of looking around, they managed to get together about $20 million of land. So it took a long time to do quite little, to be honest. We spent about $20 million on the road, and then Zenara took it over and finished it. So that through that road contract, we were able to get paid in the land that we received from government. And the land, unfortunately, had a lot of trouble. There was, environmental concerns on a lot of it. It took us probably 6 or 7 years suing 4 environmental ministers to do EIAs, to get the EIAs done, and a lot of public resistance against the land that we'd got, especially the wetlands in Borrowdale. That's called the Borrowdale Flay. We had to do a lot of tests with environmentalists and ascertain that it was not ecologically damaging to do the developments that were intended. Government actually had zoned that land for urban development in the 60s. So it was always earmarked for development, but they could never, find the right developer or do the right deal. And eventually when we came in, we were fortunate enough in timing, I think, to be able to persuade government to give us that land. And today that's the Borrowdale Flay where we're building Pokogoro. So one of the developments on the far end of the Flay, towards the Pomona side, is where Pokogoro is. Diagonally opposite is where the Mall of Zimbabwe is on Borrowdale Road. So that's the flagship development. The Mall of Zimbabwe is a $100 million project with partners of ours from South Africa, the McCormack family. They've listed in the last 2 years, their company, and they've built about 70 malls to date. So that's still on the cards. The mall will come out the ground when the economy finally improves. And in the meantime, we focused our efforts on the residential estates. So we're building in Pokogoro. Millennium Heights is across the Flay next to Dandara, which is a zoned area for walk-up flats. So we're doing 2 and 3 level flats. We've built the first block of 24 units that we're currently selling. We've done a development in Mount Pleasant of 12 homes in an estate, and in Gun Hill. So we have been quite busy this year, refocusing, the team and getting the vision around customer centricity, and just digitalization has become a big part of our efforts, and being online. So I think the onset of COVID as well has stimulated a lot of the world, turning online. But we had strategized that in the latter part of last year. I was actually invited to go study at Harvard, Josie. You would be surprised to hear a guy who didn't finish school ends up at Harvard. So I was in
Really?
Yeah. I went to.
So when were you supposed to start?
I started last year. The first year, it's a 3-year program in September and October of last year. It's basically like an MBA. It's called the OPM, Owner President Management Program. And in that course, I got to realize everything that I'd learned in my 35 years of doing business, I unlearned at Harvard, because I really knew nothing. And the world today is really driven by big data, and that's the future economy. In my view, is that data is where the future economy is. Companies like Tesla has nothing to do with driving cars. It's all about the data they're obtaining from the cars, looking at the roads, and that's why they're far ahead of their competition. So anyone that has access to big data, Google, Facebook, there are many companies, Apple, you could identify, are going to lead the future economy of the world. And in Africa, we've really been far behind in that sense. And that stimulated me to kind of reinvigorate the drive in terms of digitalization and just becoming more online as a company, as a developer. So that's where our efforts have been this year. And I think it's paying fruits, it's paying results, even though it's been a very difficult year, both with COVID and the Zimbabwean situation with the economy. Having that never give up attitude of persevering has helped. And we've gone through, I think, the difficult spots now, and we're finally seeing some light.
All right, Ken, tell me, you're mentioning about Zimbabwean economy. Has it affected your business in any way in terms of property selling? Are Zimbabweans still investing in property?
Yes, they are. There is, I think, an inherent, if I can call it a tradition in the culture, that Zimbabweans are very conscientious to firstly put their children through schooling. The parents will go through any amount of sacrifices, regardless of what social level they're on. You can have domestic workers that really save all their money to send their kids to school. And I think that goes through society, through races, through religion. Generally, Zimbabweans are very conscientious about education. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is that once they've done that, I think any other savings that they can put aside will go into property. Zimbabweans really want to own their own property as opposed to renting it. So you'll find a traditional model is kind of buying a stand out there somewhere, and it could be, in the high density or low density, it doesn't really matter, but a person typically would buy a stand, find the cash, either equity or borrow, buy the stand. And of course, hyperinflation has helped this because it wipes out the cost of the mortgage. Debt is eradicated completely, and we've had 2 cycles of hyperinflation in Zimbabwe now. So the benefit that we could thank Robert Mugabe for is actually that he's by eroding completely the capital base of the savings of pensioners. On the one hand, it's terrible, but on the other hand, he's gifted that equity and that capital to the landowners or the property owners that had mortgages, because their mortgages have been cancelled out in real value. So that ownership has been transferred to those people. And then once they've got the land, it's easier to start borrowing money using the land as a security, as collateral. Or slowly, the typical model is slowly, put in foundations this year, the following year, put up the walls. Over 3 or 4 or 5 years, they'll put up the house, even finish it without paint and some basic plastering, but live in the house. And then over the next few years, finish off the plastering and painting and internal finishes, and then eventually end up with a home. So I think that model has been there for a while. And because of that, there's been a high demand of homes in Zimbabwe. Typically, you would say there's at least 500,000 homeowners on the waiting list in Harare alone. And a lot of them are for high density, stands, which we don't sell. We're in the low density, we're in prime areas, but it filters up. And we've definitely seen that there's a pent up demand. I think the biggest problem in Zimbabwe as I said, a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, I've been crying the same story for 4 years now. We need to have cancellation and removal of the bond notes and RTGS and replaced with US dollars. We have to dollarize the economy. It's already naturally happening now. And I think that needs to be maintained as the main currency for at least 10 years to bring stability. That is the biggest problem that we've got in Zimbabwe, is the monetary unit. Everything else follows. I came up with like a 10-point plan. If we have time, I can share some of them on the economy. And that was about 2 years ago. In 2018, I was invited. In 17, I was invited to the Reuters in Durban in London, and then in 18 to the South African one. And I stick by those 10 points. I really believe that it's the economic side of our equation is actually a simple one. If there's discipline and willingness on behalf of government, I think it can be solved really easily. The political one may take a longer time and is more complicated. But I think on the economic side, it's really a simple equation. If we dollarize, I believe there'll be a lot more inflows of capital especially from the diasporans who are working out the country and living there. They want to have something back home. They're prepared to send their savings and buy something.
All right. So there's a lot of people like me, youths, that look up to you as a mentor, that find you very inspirational. Some would want to get into business, maybe property development or real estate. What advice can you give them?
I think you've got to stick to your guns. So identifying earlier on is important, either to find a sense of purpose or direction. Some people are born with a sense of purpose. My daughter is an example, and I was not born with that kind of same strong sense of purpose. But if you feel in your heart this sense of purpose of what you need to achieve, that's kind of what will drive you, because there'll be times in business when things get really tough, and there'll be a lot of adversity. I found in my own life many times, friends have betrayed me, allies have turned against me. The situation has turned against me several times in Zimbabwe on the economy. Those are things that you can't plan for, and you really need to have gut to persevere. And that gut needs to be linked to some sense of purpose. So the first thing I would say is identify, what is your purpose, and what direction are you going in, and what is your goal that you want to achieve, and relentlessly stick to it. The biggest temptation is to kind of get sidetracked or find another opportunity, and then you're going in this direction, then you see, well, maybe I should.
Because you feel like it's not working, Ken. Sometimes you feel like it's not working. You try this, it's not working. You try this, and then government changes rules. You try this, and then tomorrow you wake up, the law has changed. You don't know what to do.
I think there's nothing wrong with what they call in the tech world of iterating, trying trial and error to improve something. And I think iteration is important. But I think there's a difference of changing direction completely. So maybe what you initially set out on is not exactly what will work out. And we all know the statistics are not in our favor. 99% of businesses fail. So that's a reality. So there has to be a line that you draw in the sand, either by saying you've stuck to this, and I'm talking about years. This doesn't happen in months or weeks. Lotteries happen, but normally success takes years of hard work and sweat and perseverance. So, after a year or two, you kind of get a feel, is this still going to work or not? Maybe you have to change it a little bit. But after 3-4 years, if it's not working and you're losing money, then you've got to draw a line in the sand and close it. But if it is working, maybe it's just changing, fine-tuning things, small adjustments. There's a scripture that says, by small and simple things, great things are brought to pass. And I've seen it in my life so many times. It's in the minute details, the small little changes. If you look at the helm of a ship, that steers the ship, you can have a huge ship, the Titanic, and it's the small little helm that turns the whole ship. And that's how it is in life. So it's these small little changes that you make that make a big difference. So I'd say my advice would be 3 things. Get the direction right, look out for the small things, and stick to your plan. Have determination and perseverance. Never give up.
Thank you so much. And then there is something that is amazing that I picked up today. When I saw your pictures, when I saw, there's a guy called Ken Sharpe, he's into real estate, he owns Pokogoro and things like that. I thought you were actually like my age mate. What is your secret? Because you married your wife. When you married your wife, I was only 10 years old. You've been a businessman for 35 years. That's like, I'm 30, 38, 39. I mean, you're already a businessman. What's your secret to keep your structure so young? I mean, you look so young.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to give all my secrets away, Josie, but I think I have a lot of Russian friends, and they often say to me, what do you do to de-stress? Because you always seem like you're never under any stress. You never have pressure. And I think the secret is just, I joke to them in Russian and saying it translates something like, if you don't want stress, don't stress out.
Okay,
As
if you
easy
don't
as
want
that
stress, don't
sounds,
stress out.
right? As
If
easy
you
as
don't
that
want
sounds,
stress,
don't stress out.
okay.
So
As in, don't
the
stress
answer
out
though is
how?
like, that's the real question, is how not to stress out. So people have a
Yes.
fight or flight. There's naturally inbuilt into us is a fight or flight response. You may have heard of this. So the adrenaline in your body that comes from your adrenal glands is what causes you to either run when you're in a position of danger or fight. I'm a fighter, so I stay in fight. But everyone is
Okay.
built in differently. So you've got to look at your mechanism. If you're a fighter, then typically you want to get that energy out. And, I find adventure sports, I do exercise, I get outdoors. Those are the things that I have a release from.
Okay.
Other people that have a flight response need a different coping mechanism. So it's really the mechanism that you use to cope with. And things like sleep are really important. Getting a good 9 hours sleep a day is really important.
Good.
Not 7
That
or
I
8,
do.
but 9 hours. Well, there you've got a good start.
Mhm.
Diet, like eating vegetables and fruits fresh, organic preferably. That's really important. Limiting your meat intake, having
I'll have a problem with that.
you eat a lot of meat.
I love meat. I'm
Try and
Zimbabwean.
avoid, try and avoid the red meats. I
Right.
maybe have a steak once a month now. So fish, chicken, yeah, I can eat every day. But red meat, I tend to avoid it as much as possible.
Okay.
Although I love it, and I was already before this lifestyle change, which probably happened in my early 30s. I'd realized even before my accident, I'd realized I needed to start maintaining myself to be in good condition. So exercise, diet, and then the third one I would say really important is your mind, your mindset.
Mhm.
You've got to have and that it could be spiritual. You could meditate, you could read, but it's really important to have that spiritual balance. So it's all about mind, body, and soul, the three parts of ourselves as a being that make us up. We've got to take care of those three parts.
Okay. All right. So, what are the three things that, if people Google about you, they'll never find that you want people to know about you today?
Yeah. Well, I've told you one, that I come from a Viking family.
Yes.
The second one will be that probably my brother, whom I love dearly, my younger brother Noel, shot me with a pellet gun because I used to tease him endlessly. When he was young, I used to pick on him and kind of bully him, I guess. I'm not very proud of it to say. But he was very angry with me on one occasion. He actually shot me twice, but on this occasion, he shot me from quite a distance and wounded me in my knee. I've still got a scar from it,
A mark. Yeah.
a mark. Yeah.
Mhm.
Something else about me that probably no one will find out is that I spend a lot of time in the recent years in meditation and prayer. In fact, every day at 4:30 in the afternoon, I have a meeting with God for at least half an hour. So I go and find a quiet spot. Here, it's fortunate that we have a lot of beautiful beaches, and I spend on a rock, probably just sitting there and contemplating and talking to God. He talks to me through the clouds, and I see His presence all around me. I really believe that He is not just a Father that's somewhere out there. He's really with us all the time. His Spirit, through the Holy Ghost, is with us. And if we want to experience that, we can. And it's something that I really try and do every day. I read the scriptures every day, twice a day actually, in the morning when I wake up, um, preferably before sunrise. I send out a daily verse to some people with. And then I read scriptures with my family at night before we go to sleep. And we pray 5 times a day. We pray over every meal, and we have personal prayer and family prayer. So those are things that I really value in my life personally, and something that I don't talk about much. But it's really helped me in the last few years get a sense of what my destiny is and what my purpose is.
So when you talk to God and you say you speak to God and he communicates with you through the clouds, there is something that I noticed that when you look up the clouds, when you look up the sky and you watch the clouds, there's actually like pictures. If you really
Yes,
want to look at them deeply,
that's
there are
it.
pictures. Is that how he
There are.
communicates with you?
Yes, yes,
Right.
exactly.
So
They're
I will do
images.
that. I'll do that quite often now as well.
Oh,
I'm
great,
learning from.
great.
Mhm. All right. And do you like football?
Not really, no. I've been to a couple of World Cup championships, and I love to go to the semi-final or final to watch live. But I like it more for the, I guess, the competition to see who's going to win. But I don't follow
Okay.
any clubs regularly, no.
And you
I'm
don't
a
support
cyclist.
any, like,
Not really, no. I'm not really a fan.
okay.
I,
I'm not, okay. And I'm not going to ask you if you love cooking because I already know you do. You cook for
yes,
your daughter quite often. I've seen the
yes.
pictures. But what's your favorite meal?
I love cooking Christmas turkey and ham. Every year I'm the chef. So,
Okay.
sometimes it's one or two turkeys depending on the number of people we've got. And it's definitely the traditional gammon, the ham with the pineapple and cherries, and often a duck or a lamb, a roast lamb. So I'll put on a couple of roasts for Christmas. That's one of my favorites. I love making steaks as little as I eat them. I can do a good barbecue, good braai. Um, I love Japanese food, so I can make sushi, the rice and the fish. And we often eat fish, so I love doing different fish dishes, curries or grills, sometimes fries. But I
Mm,
enjoy cooking.
you're already making me salivate. I haven't had my breakfast yet.
I have to cook your meal one day, Josie.
Thank you so much. I would really appreciate. But you've been to, I think, many parts of the world. Which part of the world is the best for you?
We actively decided 4 years ago that we would travel. We left Zimbabwe on a mission to do as many countries as possible. So we ended up about 70 countries over the 4 years, 200 cities. And I must say, Japan for me, I was really taken aback by. We stayed in Japan for 2.5 months. We got to live in different
Mm,
parts of Japan, different islands, right from the south, Okinawa, to the north. And then the people fascinated me. Their culture, they're so disciplined, they're so organized, they're so polite. It's just really a fascinating culture. I think if everyone could adopt a little bit of the Japanese culture, we'd be a better world.
mm. All right. Thank you so much, Ken Sharpe, for your time. We've spent an hour knowing so much about you, and today I learned a lot from you. But before we go, any last words to our viewers today?
Just on the economy for Zimbabwe, that 7-10 point turnaround plan that I was going to mention, I think we need to really focus. Every citizen, I believe, has a responsibility. Freedom is not so much about political freedom as it is about economic emancipation. And until we've had economic benefication of the majority of the citizens of Zimbabwe, and we've taken people out of unemployment and put them into employment, we haven't done a good job at all. And
Mm,
90% of our population is unemployed, or 90 plus. People are living on $1 a day. It's a disgrace. So I think we need to pressure the powers that be to remove this story of local RTGS and have a US dollar economy. We need to live within our means as a government. We need to pay our civil servants $300 a month, minimum wage, a living wage, and reduce
okay.
civil servants by 50%. We'd have too many people being paid too little. It's as simple as that. We need to encourage public and private sector to save money into a US dollar fixed kind of fund that has interest bearing and tax free. We need to lower and simplify the tax system. We need to have government inject capital into the recapitalization of the US dollar economy and service some of the treasury bills and debt that they've created out there. We need
Absolutely.
to remove all the bureaucracy of the trades, of the barriers of trade, simplify policy. Um, I think there's a lot of work to do in the economy. Ultimately, it's about trust in the future. Are we going to trust our country? Both those living in the country and those like me and you that live out the country, we have to put a certain amount of trust back into the country. And every investor needs to be able to answer the question, can I trust this economy? At the moment, they can't. A big reason is
Absolutely. Yes.
because of the currency. But I think what I would say to everyone in closing is don't trust so much the system, which we know is now very corrupt. We've reached alarming proportions of corruption. It's systemic. Rather than trusting the system, trust the people. The people of Zimbabwe are good people. and they have a long history and a longer history ahead of them. So let's look at trusting the people of Zimbabwe and getting our economy working. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, and we'll definitely catch up with you again sometime and talk about your continued ventures in business.
Thank you. Nice talking to you, Josie. Look
Thank you
after
very
yourself.
much. All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.